Right? Like when she says you're not drawn to an organization, you're drawn to issues, and that Asian Americans, we cannot stay silent, we cannot be the model minority. And I think that especially now, especially in this moment, we need to really think about what that means to us, right? Like I think that on a national level, there is a huge disparity in the way that the United States looks at its POC. And that trickles down to not just, our communities, but to our universities, to our classrooms, to peer-to-peer relationships. And now how do we recognize that and how do we address it? So I kind of want to, talk about the reason why we're named the Yuriko Chema Cultural Center, right? And what we hold when we say that we're from the YKCC, because it's not about this space, it's about the issues that attach to it and why we care and the values that we hold. So I want to take some moment to just talk about our history, the history of the center, which is going to be 30 years old next October. So the cultural centers were created in the 60s, in the 70s, due to student activism. The university did not give the students of color this space. Students demand it and fought for it and said that as a student of color, we need a place to call home because UMass Amherst, even the name Amherst, right? He was a colonizer, and that's what our university and our town is named after. So in this white supremacist institution, how do we carve out space for our POC, and in this context, for our Asian Americans, right? And students did this by uniting, as shown by these articles, these newspaper articles that are in the archives of this university. Essentially, kind of going back to the history, what had happened was that professors and students of color and ASA actually was involved in this process. So ASA has a huge legacy in this fight. They came together and they demanded for space. And that fight was long, it was hard, as you can see from these headings, right? That the Asians and the Latinos and the natives and the Black students, they all had to come together and say that this needs to stop, that we need space, and that we need it now. So the United Asia Learning Resource Center was created. Most of y'all do not know that name because it no longer exists, but this was essentially an act for POC, and that I expect that when administrations who are POC, who are in spaces of power, to take those values too and really apply it into their work. They can't just be there and that's it, because that's not enough. So, going into 2010, obviously I was not part of this university back then, but archival history told us that the university decided that they wanted to go down this route of multiculturalism. So therefore, they took all these academic support spaces, which had cultural centers attached to them, because there's a difference between cultural work and academics. At least that's the way the university kind of dictated. And they took these academic support centers and consolidated them, and took all the staff who had fought so hard, who worked so hard to maintain space and place and carve out this, legacy for its students of color. They took that, despite student protests, as seen here, that students literally had said in this article that divide and rule, right? And they took these spaces and they consolidated into what we know as CMAS today. And now, here we are, right? The cultural spaces as 4 separate entities and CMAS. And I want to kind of tell the story of now and how we all in this room can influence the now, because we can't change the past, but all we can do is ensure that this legacy, the legacy that ASA has fought so hard for since their founding, that the legacy of all of these students of color who's been through these doors, that, the resource that we have is because of people who had fought before. How do we continue this fight, not for us, but for the future generations that come through the doors of UMass? And I would like to kind of talk about that. So this semester, we, as the Cultural Center staff, began to recognize and I'm a sophomore, y'all. Like, I haven't been here for very long, but I've started seeing issues, and a lot of cultural center staff, like myself, started seeing problems with our spaces. For example, talking about the YKCC specifically, we all know that there's a Worcester being built, and that the old Worcester is going to get demolished. So we had the question of, where are we going to be? Like, where are we? Like, are we just going to be destroyed and that's it? And that, like, the students who come here in the future will just be like, what's YKCC? Just like we're like, what's UALRC, right? Like, are we just going to be a forgotten acronym? And we didn't want that, because we care and we think that our space does a lot for UMass. So what we did was that we discovered a document called the UMass Amherst Cultural Center's External Review Report, which was an institutional report that was created back in 2016, detailing all the issues that was expressed for decades by cultural center staff, by students who have gone through these doors, detailing all the issues. Like, for example, a lot of these spaces are not accessible for people who are in wheelchairs. A lot of these spaces are very old. Another thing is that lack of funding, how throughout the years funding has just been slowly cut from us, that there's no transparency in terms of, you know, what the history of these spaces are going to be, and if the university even wants us to grow. So I'm going to pass around this external review, because I think that, you know, primary sources are important, like my high school teacher told us. So I'm going to show y'all what this really means. And I can also email folks a copy of this. There's only two, so if one wants to like look around and pass it around, if interested. So because of that, we wanted to start this conversation, right? And like that, this external review was the beginning of it. But none of the staff really knew about this report, even though we worked for the space. So the students of the cultural centers decided that, you know, we've been here, we aren't blind to the fact that there's issues in our center. So we decided to create a letter of demand for the university, because UMass has this platform, it has this like slogan every year that quote unquote hate has no home, you know, diversity and inclusion, like all this messaging, like literally the minute you walk through this door in the fall, you get handed like 5 billion pins that says hate has no home at UMass, and you're like, cool, I have a pin now, so is racism gone? Like, did we just solve racism with a lawn sign? Like, is this how it works? So we decided that enough was enough, and that we needed to have our voices heard, and that we're going to do it in a professional way by sending a letter. A letter. I know, we were going to like mail it too, but then we're like, we don't want to pay for a postage stamp. So I'm going to pass around this letter as well, which was written by these students. Let's get this straight. The students who are educated by this higher education like institute at UMass Amherst. We created this because y'all are educating us. Y'all like POC are getting like educated. So we created this letter with the stuff that we see on a day-to-day basis, and I'm going to pass this around as well because primary sources. And that and this is kind of where we are here now, right? Like this, I don't really have a grand conclusion for y'all because this story is not yet told. This story is only we're like in the, I don't know where chapter we are in, honestly, in the story, but like what I'm asking for everybody is to know that this is what has happened this semester and to think about ways that we can move forward, right? And what can y'all do as leaders of your individual like organizations or just leaders at UMass Amherst, POC leaders, student leaders, do to contribute to this fight? Because this fight was not started last month. This fight was started 30 years ago. And how do we, while we celebrate heritage, while we celebrate culture, how do we still reckon with the fact that we need to also be activists? And it's hard, right? Like, it's really, really, really hard. But the thing is, we have to do it. Because if we don't do it, no one else is going to advocate for us. No one else is going to, bring us to the table. We have to walk ourselves to the table and sit down and be like, we are here and we're here to stay. So that's what I'm asking y'all to think about through this dinner. This dinner, you know, like good food, good company and all that, but it's also at the end of the day about our legacy and what we want to build at UMass as students of color. On top of that, we have created a petition that states, I support the protection and preservation of the cultural centers at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I believe that these spaces are an important part of the university and should be given adequate funding, staff, and resources. And this petition, I'm going to pass around if folks can sign. That'll be great, because the thing is, the future of the cultural centers are very much in limbo right now. We were told that the cultural centers are going to be transplanted into Goodell along with other support centers. And we were not told that like 2 years ago. We were told that like last week. There's no way that the university didn't know. I think that's an excuse. There's no way that the university, somebody didn't know that that was happening. And if they didn't know, then I'm wondering how much they're getting paid for that job, because I can do it better, y'all. But the thing is, I want everybody to think about what it means for y'all to be part of UMass as students of color and our role, right? We are students, but we are also students of color. Until racism could be like a 9-to-5 thing or like follow our school schedule, then we can't stop there, right? Because there's no way that we can just be like, okay, you know, I'm done, like, done with class, like, racism's gonna, you know, go home too. Like, that's just not the reality of it, y'all. Like, and that's a burden that as POC we do have to hold and recognize, but it's something that I feel like should also empower us, because we know that we can fight, right? And that there's been histories of people who are fighting, and we must continue that. And I'm going to pass on this position, but I love the Hamilton musical, and I'm going to end with a quote from the Hamilton musical, and it says that legacy, what is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden that you'll never get to see. And that's what the students and the faculty and the people that came before us did. We no longer know their names, but we know we are, you know, here because of them. And I'm asking for everybody to do the same for the future generations of students that are going to come after us, because we're going to be here for 4 years and we're going to be out. So thanks so much for your time. I'm going to pass around this position. If folks could sign on to this, that would be really much appreciated. Thanks.